This week, on a special extended division of The Other Side Australia, the West divided. First along the lines of political ideologies, now religious minorities clashing as the dominant religion of the West, Christianity, is at its lowest level of support in recent history. What is going on in our nations? We don't know, but we need to find out, and fast. Tonight, our contribution to that critical discussion in a special edition of The Other Side Australia.
What's going on in Israel is far bigger than Israel.
Yes.
This is a defining moment, and it is a battle between the left and the right, actually.
And
it really is.
civilization
and it's
and
about
chaos.
It's about civilization, the rule of law, democracy, the truth, good, etc., versus chaos, evil, dysfunction, barbarity. That's the way I see it.
G'day Adelaide, g'day Wollongong, g'day Australia, and welcome to The Other Side Australia, episode 232 for the weekend commencing Friday evening, November 17, 2023. I'm Damian. Last weekend, we saw tensions between Australia's Muslim and Jewish communities reach a point that nobody wants to see in this country. When people come to live in Australia, the idea is that they agree to abide by the values upon which this nation has been built. And the reality is those values are essentially Anglo-Celtic and Christian in origin. On top of those values, we have the British legal system, parliamentary system, and the rule of law. In the 1970s, Australia officially adopted a policy of multiculturalism, something strongly opposed by many people at the time. Some who opposed it were downright racists, but many were ordinary people just concerned that the dominant culture not be lost. These were not all white people, by the way, whatever that is. They were mixed race, like my family. People from all over the world who'd made this country home. Not because it was a multicultural country with no stated values of its own, but precisely because of the values of this nation, those Anglo-Celtic Christian values and the British systems that those values supported. Multiculturalism was supposed to still respect that the nation has its own dominant value set. And immigrants are supposed to adopt that. And in 90% of cases, they do exactly that. As a result, we've got one of the most peaceful, productive, and interesting nations on earth. But with the rise of woke identity politics in recent years, we've seen a decline in immigrants assimilating or accepting even the dominant culture, and more fragmentation. Many immigrants not integrating as much as they should, and some even boldly declaring their right to impose the value system from their country of origin upon Australian culture without any sense that any assimilation is required at all. Nobody has the guts to have this discussion because it's a difficult one, but we must have it. And as we've said on this show many times, if we don't define what we are as Australians, then we really have no uniting culture and really no nation. The problem is, when we talk about this stuff, actual racists and actual neo-Nazis, I'm talking about the real ones, not the fake ones that the woke kids are always whining about, anybody's right wing's a neo-Nazi. The real ones come out of the woodwork and they rear their ugly heads talking about white supremacy. And we've seen too much of that this week on the political far, far right. It's no good just dismissing these people as barbarians. They're people who are rightly afraid that their culture is being lost. And the rest of us don't listen to their valid concerns and fears. And we have to, or they'll grow in radicalism and in number. Nowhere is this more prevalent than in the UK right now, where 300,000 people marched in support of Palestinians last weekend on Remembrance Day, the 11th of the 11th. Now you'd have to call that a highly offensive middle finger to the most sacred customs and traditions of their adopted home nation. White British people and their supporters of all colours pushed back on this and launched a counter-protest, and then they were shut down by police and labelled far right-wing Nazis by the media. No doubt there were some far right-wing Nazis among them, and dare I say, left-wing Nazis too. But if you think that's all they were, then you're kidding yourself. And if you think that 300,000 people walking down the capital city of England waving the flag of a foreign people with whom another foreign nation is at war is a good way to behave in a country that you've emigrated to and that there isn't going to be any backlash, you're deluded. To make matters worse, when the British Foreign Secretary, Suella Braverman, the equivalent of our Foreign Minister, made a statement saying it looked like that the police were tougher on the protesters who were standing up for Remembrance Day than they were on the pro-Palestine marches, she got fired. Conservative Prime Minister Rishi Sunak fired her. Then, in one of the strongest political moves in recent British political history, he raised the former Prime Minister David Cameron from the dead by making him the new Foreign Secretary. But Cameron wasn't even in Parliament as an MP, so they had to bring him into the UK Upper House, the House of Lords, as a life peer first, so that they could put him in the cabinet. In short, the mother country is in turmoil and it has a massive identity and values problem. And we seem to be heading in the same direction. Pro-Palestine marches took place in all Australian capital cities again last weekend, with the added delight of pro-Palestine protesters descending on Australia's biggest Jewish suburb in any city in our country, Caulfield, in a protest which erupted into violent clashes on the streets. Why Caulfield? Well, there was a fire at a local burger joint called Burgatory. This is the CCTV footage of the incident supplied to the Australian newspaper. You can see the two men breaking into the burger store here. Burgatory is owned by a Jordanian guy named Hash Taya. Hash is a big supporter of Palestine, and he says his business was deliberately torched by someone in protest and that it came after a number of threats that he'd received online. Victoria Police late this week said their investigation was well advanced and that it does not appear to be racially motivated. But it sparked a wild protest the following evening, which was covered brilliantly, there it goes exploding now, was covered brilliantly by Melbourne-based independent reporter and videographer Rukshan Fernando.
Hey guys, Rukshan here. I'm coming to you guys near the Burgatory restaurant. It was meant to be at 7 o'clock, a show of support from the Palestinian community. You guys just asked why you're here?
Yeah, we're here to show our support for Burgatory.
Yeah, what about
And
the hostages?
pardon?
What about the hostages?
What about all the Palestinian hostages, mate?
Tell me why you guys are here.
If the police can't protect our business owners, then we're going to come protect them.
Tense here, but the police are here watching over everything that's happening as well. Come up the street a little bit here and you can see there's two groups gathered here. You've got the Free Palestinian side, the pro-Palestinian side. On the other side, you've got a small group of Israelis there. They're from the community.
Disgusting. You shut your mouth, you talk.
I live in this area. What are you doing here?
We are everywhere in Australia.
We're protesting dead children, men.
So if you could just move over to the ground and don't yell any.
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
In the heartland of Caulfield, they had to close down a synagogue service halfway through tonight. We don't go to anyone else's area to cause a fight. We need to be here to stand for our people, because if not, we don't stand here. The police aren't protecting. They're praying, they're saying in Arabic, calling for the death of Jews, the death of Yahuds, the death of all of these people, and the police just stand here and don't shut us down.
That video is from an excellent 15-minute report by Rukshan Fernando, which you can find on his X profile at Twitter, @RealRukshan. As the sun set in the twilight, things heated up quite a lot.
You can't do this! You can't do this, you brought
Police are working very hard to keep people separated. Look, it's very, I've covered a lot of protests and I've covered a lot of issues in our country, and it's quite disturbing and disheartening to see this happening in our community, where we have members of the Israeli Jewish community, we have members of the Palestinian community here. We're in Caulfield, a predominantly Jewish area as well. And you're having this kind of standoff between two communities. you can see how much division these issues abroad have caused, even here in Australia for us. Those of us watching on the sidelines in many ways in Australia, and you can see just how tense it's been today. I mean, I'm trying not to be emotional, but it's very sad to see the state of Australia when it's like this, and hopefully over time calmer heads can prevail, and we don't need to see scenes like this in our country, because a lot of us that come to Australia, we come from all parts of the world where we have conflict, where we have issues, and we try to live in peace and harmony and not have these type of issues in this country. And to see that here in Australia like this, it's very disheartening.
This protest was actively stirred up by professional activists too, the Socialist Alliance. It's classic socialism playbook stuff. They always jump on any social unrest and any cause that they can to just stir things up.
So these are the marshals here. These are from either Antifa or the Socialist Alliance here. These are the Socialist Alliance people here. So it's interesting, it's organized by left-wing activists in solidarity with the Palestinian community as well. From what I've observed at these protests, these left-wing activists, these socialist Marxists, provide the security. So there you go, marshals start walking. There you go. He's trying to get them. Someone jumped out of the car. All right, they've lost a bit of control, guys. OC spray has been deployed. What happened? What happened?
All the viewers here that think that we're violent. These people from the other side, the religion of peace, they came here and attacked us. The religion of peace. We are being incited by violence. Off the road, please.
Police had to work hard to contain things as the night progressed. Demonstrators threw rocks, and a synagogue adjacent to the park you can see there had to be evacuated.
And these are the activists that lost control of the situation today. This is Antifa, the socialists, the Marxists.
Pro-Palestinian supporters are coming to the Jewish community and instigating what can only be termed as a violent demonstration. A number of them were arrested. I'm going to go and see if I can lay charges against the organisers. They couldn't have had a permit for it. And this is our Sabbath. Nice way to bring in our Shabbat.
That report from Rukshan Fernando, and you can watch all of Rukshan's stuff at Real Rukshan on X, Twitter. Today, two very special guests on the other side Australia joining me in the studio to talk specifically about the impact of the Israel-Palestine conflict on our own country and Australia's peace and security. Joining me in the studio, a regular guest on the show, former Premier of Queensland and Lord Mayor of Brisbane, Campbell Newman.
G'day, Damian.
How are you, Campbell?
How are you?
Good to have you here. And we also have in the studio, not in the studio, but on Zoom joining us, Dr. David Adler from the Australian Jewish Association, the president of the association. David, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure, and very happy to talk about the current issues.
Thank you. And also we invited Dr. Ali Kadri, the CEO of the Islamic College of Brisbane, to join us. Dr. Kadri unfortunately had a clash of appointments, but he was able to pre-record an interview and we will be hearing from him later in the show. David Adler, if I could start with you, what is your reaction to those scenes that we've just watched from Caulfield in Melbourne last weekend?
Well, two reactions. The first is it's un-Australian. I don't care what one's political views are, and of course there may well be people who have complete opposite worldviews on issues and on conflicts, but to bring violence and threats onto the streets of Melbourne, onto the streets of Sydney, is totally inappropriate. And I think there's also some criticism to be made of police that, and we saw it in the COVID demonstrations, that they would clamp down on and perhaps overreacted on some of the COVID demonstrations. But when it comes to anti-Israel activities, they seem to just stand back and watch. So the first reaction is it's contrary to Australian values. The second is that we are shocked at the extent of overt anti-Semitism that has been unleashed. Obviously in Sydney we had those incredible and ugly scenes of F the Jews and gas the Jews. There have been numerous threats, there have been assaults. In Caulfield at that particular event, I think there was 1 or 2 arrests.
Yep.
So the overt anti-Semitism is absolutely shocking, frankly scary, and for the first time in living memory, we are witnessing in Australia scenes that are a bit reminiscent of the prelude to the Holocaust. It needs to be taken seriously. Calls for boycotts of Jewish businesses, the anti-Semitic graffiti, hunting Jews on the streets, various protests, aggressive.
David, there was a protest in Sydney as well at Coogee. You've sent us some images of that. Let's have a look at some of that. And Fred Paul's covered that fairly extensively on ADH this week as well. Just talk us through what happened in Coogee from your perspective.
Well, there was a convoy of cars and some motorbikes that came from Western Sydney, probably started around Lidcombe, to the eastern suburbs. So it went from the area where there is a large Muslim community into an area where there's a large Jewish community. So the geography of that particular event raises an issue that this is deliberate provocation.
Yeah, okay, same thing as Caulfield. We saw the
same thing.
Muslim community and leftists, I might add, was organised. I think Rukshan made it fairly clear there that there was a strong Antifa and Socialist Alliance element to that protest at Caulfield. Socialists always jumping on the bandwagon, I suppose, of everybody else's issues. But when you talk about anti-Semitism, David, you break it into 4 distinct groups. Do you want to just go through quickly what those 4 groups are for us?
Well, the main one we're seeing on the streets of Sydney and Melbourne at the moment, and also on social media, is the Islamic anti-Semitism. It has a historical basis, it has a theological basis in Islam, that, you know, Jews are the worst of the infidels. The second area where we've seen a major growth is the left-wing political anti-Semitism. I mean, obviously we saw the UK Labor Party get into a great deal of trouble under Jeremy Corbyn, and they were actually found to be anti-Semitic. We say that the Greens in Australia have crossed the line, and they are technically a party which is anti-Semitic. Some of the left of the Labor Party, I won't name anyone for obvious reasons. So left-wing anti-Semitism is the second. The third, which seems to get a lot of focus, but in Australia, fortunately, is relatively small, are the neo-Nazi types, the far right.
Is it small in Australia? Because I've been mortified by what I've seen this week from our side of politics on the extreme far right. I shouldn't say it's our side of politics. It's definitely not my politics. But, you know, we're centre right here on this show, and it's a bit of a concern when you see these sort of neo-Nazis emerging on social media, and I've seen a lot of that this week. It's relatively small in Australia, obviously amplified by the media. This is a good way to kick the ride.
Look, ASIO have said that it's growing, so certainly the trend is upwards. When I say small, I mean in terms of physical actions. Their meetings, their rallies generally attract, you know, anywhere from 12 to 24 people. unlike the other protests, which are many, many thousands. On social media, yes, it's more significant, but so that's the third group. And the fourth group, which frankly also needs to be called out, but there is a reluctance in our community to name it, but I'm prepared to do so, and that is the left-wing Jewish anti-Semitism. Yes, you can be Jewish and anti-Semitic. There is also a long-term religious basis for that, but modern examples, we saw in the Soviet Union that there were Jews working with the communists to suppress the practice of Judaism. In the lead up to the Holocaust, there was actually a couple of Jewish groups who sided with the Nazis. The largest is called Der Verband National Deutsche Juden.
How does one psychologically rationalise that, I wonder, without wanting to get into it too deeply, but that's extraordinary.
Well, I guess they made the judgment that if they were to integrate into the power of the day, then they would be fine.
Right.
Or there were commercial benefits.
It's a form of appeasement, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
don't hit me, go and get those guys.
Yeah. Well, all right. So that's the fourth one. David, based on that, I just want to go to Campbell. Campbell, the massive left-wing element that we're seeing here, taking what David's saying, number 2 and number 4.
Yeah, I'll certainly acknowledge what David has said about the extreme right, but they are, in my humble opinion, fringe. Whereas I'd assert that everyone knows my politics, my background. I'll just say it today. The Labor Party and, of course, the Greens have a huge problem here. And indeed, many people who are card-carrying members of the Labor Party and the Greens, and indeed office bearers, are anti-Semitic and are fanning the flames of this. And the thing that I'm interested in is when the mainstream media will finally stand up and force our Prime Minister and indeed Labor premiers and their police ministers to actually act, to stand up and actually take positive action. David, with the greatest respect, the Victorian police are a disgrace. They were a disgrace prior to COVID when they couldn't go after African youth criminal gangs. Then during COVID, they showed that they were great at repressing the community and people who, quite rightfully did want to protest. And now they can't seem to find the bottle to deal with things like happened in Caulfield. It was a deliberate provocation, and they should have taken firm and decisive action. And we've got federal law, we've got state laws about anti-vilification. Some of them, by the way, and I've been on the record in the past, some of those laws I question whether we should have, but they are on the books, and yet
they only get used one way.
They only get used one way. Yeah. They can take. Well, look, I mean, we've got a lady down in Tasmania who questioned the whole gender stuff the other day, has now been wheeled into a process for hate speech, right? But we've got absolute hate speech being chanted on that night in Caulfield and down in Coogee, and the materials that we've seen. And now, look, well, I mean, like the police, look, Damian, it's like this. The police need to take action now. This is an issue in our community. It needs to be nipped in the bud. And the bud was actually on the 9th of October in front of the Opera House.
Yes.
Gormless, cowardly New South Wales police in this case, who on that evening had every reason, every justification to make arrests. And who did they arrest? A guy who, for his own safety, a guy with the Israeli flag.
Yeah.
I mean, it's preposterous. So,
but there is this argument,
I've got to go back to the point.
All right. Yeah.
The Labor Party have a problem. Members and office bearers of the Labor Party and union officials are behind some of this, behind in a large degree this anti-Israel sentiment, which has then been reflected onto the Jewish community in Australia. Let me say that again. By targeting Israel, by saying Israel quite falsely has committed war crimes in their legitimate pursuit of Hamas, they have put the searchlight, if you like, or this beam of unwanted unnecessary attention on the Jewish community in Australia. So Adam Bandt and indeed many Labor people have actually, I believe, compounded this problem and made it far, far worse for the Jewish community in Australia. And it's no good saying, like Adam Bandt said in a tweet this morning, I'm against anti-Semitism. Well, you've been saying that Israel, the state of Israel, are war criminals for weeks now. Yeah, so that's the problem.
I'd like to say something. The gold standard for defining anti-Semitism, and perhaps one of the useful tools for dealing with it, is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. Australia has become a member of the IHRA, and the Greens are the only political party in the country to have rejected that definition. Why have they rejected it?
I did not know that.
Because it does deal with exactly the issue Campbell was talking about. Where is the line between legitimate criticism of Israel, and of course you can criticise Israeli policies in the same way as you would any other country. That's not anti-Semitism. But if you were to become obsessive, if you were to accuse Israel of all sorts of things that are ridiculous, they actually give a series of working examples in that definition of what constitutes crossing the line, and the Greens have rejected it. Now, our political parties, Labor and Liberal, and Parliaments, Federal, New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia, have all passed motions that notionally support the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, but in no jurisdiction has it been implemented.
Wow. Okay.
Well,
and that's a big,
so can
that's a big deal.
So can I now just give a specific example to justify my fairly pushy statement a moment ago? So in the last 2 days, I'm not sure exactly when this will go to air, but in the last 2 days or so, prior to us doing this interview, a Labor councillor in Waverley Council in Sydney has been caught out with a secret Twitter account where she has adopted a pro-Hamas position, and she has it's undoubtedly, it's indisputable, and it's been exposed by the Australian newspaper. Now, she's a member of the Labor Party. She is a councillor in the New South Wales local government. Well, I call on the Premier of New South Wales, Chris Minns, to have this woman stand down. She should resign from the council, particularly given the large Jewish community who I'm sure
which she's a part of.
Which she's a part of.
She's actually religiously Jewish.
Well, I didn't even want to get into that because it's bizarre. But it could be going back to what David said about this fourth category of self-hatred about Judaism. But anyway, but the other thing is that Anthony Albanese and Chris Minns should be expelling her from the Australian Labor Party. You know, how often have we heard from the left in this country that the standard you walk past is the standard you accept? It would be, they would be pushing that onto Dutton for a transgression by a member of the Liberal Party. It's profound. And it's hypocrisy in the extreme from the mainstream media as well, who do not pursue this person because it is quite outrageous. She's a Hamas supporter. By her own words, she has been outed. It's a terrorist organisation.
Why is she still capacity at all, let alone...
Why is she still a member of the Labor Party? Now, it needs to be dealt with. Now, there are other examples I could give you. We have a state minister's son who has been at an anti-Semitic rally early in the piece.
Yeah, New South Wales State MP.
Well, has also been
Mark Kudicic.
Well, I wasn't going to name him, but certainly he was at the rally. The point is, he's an office bearer of the Australian Labor Party. He's not just an MP's son. He's an office bearer. Now, I say to Chris Minns,
himself, the son is.
The son is. Yes. So again, forget that, we're not responsible for the actions of our adult children.
Have we got
I accept that.
Thank God.
I accept that. But the thing is, he's an office bearer and a member of the Labor Party. Again, what's the standard here? Okay, he should have been suspended.
Does the
or he
Labor
should
Party
been
have a
expelled.
problem, do you think?
The Labor Party do
like
have a
a Jeremy
problem.
Corbyn type.
They do, because there are many people in the union movement, who also are card-carrying members of the Labor Party who are involved in this push against Israel. And I totally, of course, accept what David said about the Greens. I mean, their position has been is just beyond.
I want to get onto the
bankruptcy.
I want to get onto the union movement in a sec. I just want to ask you, as a former, civic leader who's had to manage police, to go back to what we were talking about before. The police are trying to keep the peace. The police are trying to take the heat off.
Well, that's very.
So
you reckon, do you, mate?
Well, I'm just.
Look. I want to be very clear. I haven't seen anything yet that I could really criticise the Queensland Police on. But the New South Wales Police and the Victorian Police are floundering around like headless chooks, just like the Met in the City of London.
But they are caught between a rock and a hard place in a certain sense.
No, they're not.
Some people say.
No, they're not. It's a very clear line. And I am not astride the barbed wire fence like Anthony Albanese on this one, I can assure you, mate. I don't have splinters, in the behind. But it's like this. If it's anti-Semitic, if it's racial hate speech, arrest them. Make it public. Tell us that you're doing it. If there's a preacher in an Islamic teaching centre or mosque in Sydney who's preaching hate speech, we've seen 2 or 3 articles in the Australian now, tell us what's happening. Make the call, charge the person if they're found to have breached the law. That's what you've got to do. And then if,
now, look,
like
it's an existing law, right?
If Albo asserted
which
in the Parliament, Albo asserted in the Parliament in the last couple of days that there was Islamophobia on the streets of Sydney. He said that women had been abused for wearing hijab. Well, I say police take action against that. If it's happened, and I say to the Prime Minister, you might have put up or shut up as well. But I'm prepared to accept that it may have happened. Well, if that's the case, it needs to be nipped in the bud as well. Yes, I'm pro-Israel because I think, I'm 60 years old. I have watched throughout my whole life the Arab world seek to obliterate Israel. Young people in their 20s don't have that background. They haven't seen what happened with the 6-Day War. They haven't seen, what happened on Yom Kippur. They haven't seen the actions of the PLO and these various splinter organisations through the 70s and the 80s, the hijacking of planes, the taking of hostages, Entebbe in the 70s. I mean, we who are older have that background and we know what the agenda it is. It's to never respect the 1947 sort of partition, to never accept Israel's place in the world. That's why I'm so passionate in my support of Israel. And for the kids on the left, you need to go and wake up yourselves, learn a bit of history, and by all means demand a 2-state solution. I could respect that. By all means demand that when the bombs and the machine guns the bombs stop and the machine guns fall silent, that there has to be a solution for the rebuilding of Gaza as a democracy that respects Israel's right to exist. Those are things worth fighting for, but not for
Damian,
not for a terrorist organisation.
You almost alluded to the Labor Party and indeed others, some in the media. Whenever they mention anti-Semitism, it's as if they can't do it without mentioning Islamophobia.
Absolutely.
Try to build some sort of equivalence. But I want to make a very clear and strong point which hasn't been exposed enough. I can tell you our organisation has received reports of many dozens of threats against Jews, threats against Jewish organisations. We're in touch with federal and state counter-terrorism authorities 2 or 3 times a week. We've passed on lots of material. I was in an actual physical meeting with New South Wales Counter-Terrorism Police and we'd given them certain information. But I asked them a question in the converse. I said to them, we're aware of all these significant incidents. There have been some assaults, there have been some arrests. Have there been any significant threats arising out of the Jewish community directed towards Muslims? And their answer was 0, none. This is a one-way street in terms of significant threats. There has been an incident in Bondi in the last week where there was an altercation and one Jewish guy was arrested. There were 4 Arab Muslim guys there as well. The details are not yet fully known. So there has been, as a result of a street interaction, but in terms of counter-terrorism levels,
it's all been fairly one direction.
We were told by the police 0 coming out.
And that's my suspicion too, David. But I think the bottom line on the law enforcement is got to be firm. It has got to be public. It's just got to be unequivocal that we, the police, will not tolerate any breach of these laws. And again, I go back to from the 9th of October outside the Opera
Does that
House.
bother the libertarian in you, though? I mean, these are laws that we've rallied against, right?
Well, no, I don't have a problem with laws that are there to stop people screaming obscenities, which are about killing or
it's incitement,
killing other people, inciting violence. I mean, I have that. If it had been nipped in the bud on the 9th, if we'd seen strong leadership from the police minister, the police commissioner, and the Premier of New South Wales, I think there would have been a flow-on effect in a positive way to the rest of Australia. That message would have been sent that we're not going to allow that to brew up here. But it has brewed up, and I lay it at the foot of the Australian Labor Party because guess what? They're in charge in New South Wales and Victoria and federally. It's their problem.
Okay, guys, we've got to move on. So let's, every Sunday we've seen across the country for weeks now, the protests from both sides, I suppose, but predominantly it's been smaller groups of Israeli, pro-Israel ralliers, and we've had larger groups of pro-Palestine activists and marches going on. Let's just have a look at how Channel 9 reported last week's rallies in Sydney.
Moore Park, blue and white, 5,000 voices calling for the return of the 240 Hamas-held hostages.
It was Israel's 9/11.
Bring them home. Tens of thousands crying out for Palestine at Hyde Park.
I just wish our leaders would do more instead of being silent.
Would you support a ceasefire?
I would not until they can have ceasefire today if they release the hostages. That's all they have to do.
For the pro-Palestinian protesters, the blood is fake, but the passion is real.
Do you think Australia should be calling for a ceasefire?
100%. But you need to ask Albanese what he wants.
Today, no arrests, but the tension is there in Surrey Hills' Shaffer restaurant, vandalised overnight.
I think it's fair to say that right now, Jewish Australians have never felt less safe.
That's a small bit of Channel 9 News Sydney's coverage, and here's how their Melbourne newsroom reported the protests in that city on Sunday.
A Palestinian flag as wide as Swanston Street paraded through the city, leading a crowd larger and louder than ever.
Stop this! Stop the genocide! Stop killing our children!
Anthony Albanese's face was plastered across signs marched to Treasury Gardens from the steps of the State Library. Compared to Friday's ugly scene in Caulfield, this crowd was decidedly peaceful. Hash Tayer, whose restaurant was firebombed this week, prompting that clash with police, took to the stage saying he won't be silenced.
You will not succeed. Love and unity will always prevail. We need to commit every Sunday, not just until the bombs stop dropping, but until Palestine is free.
There will be no ceasefire or any change unless our hostages are back.
East of the city, a far smaller contingent of Melbourne's Jewish community flew flags in the sky over Caulfield Park, bearing messages like love from Australia, written by children for the 200-plus Israelis still being held hostage by Hamas.
Well, that's Channel 9 News Melbourne there. David, we saw the CEO of Burgatory, which is a fairly significant chain of burger joints in Melbourne, and was the one that was firebombed in Caulfield on Friday last week, which caused the street confrontation on Friday night. Just tell us a little bit about what we know about that. I understand the police have said that there's no indication that this was a politically motivated attack.
Look, you're right, although clearly one side has assumed that it is. We don't know. There is actually CCTV from across the road at some distance.
we've shown that, yeah.
Right.
So,
and it looks a bit fuzzy, and I don't know whether they can identify those two guys who, got in there and set the place alight.
whoever it was, though, we do see the CEO there at that rally chanting the from the river to the sea line, and that is to Jewish people, and they know, even if they say, "Oh,
they know what it means."
They know what it means.
We all
right?
Let's not beat around the bush, and they do themselves no favours when they carry on like that. I mean, I don't have a problem with them protesting. They've got friends and relatives who, associations back into Gaza and the West Bank, etc. They've got every right to protest. But look, let's not beat around the bush. Assertions that means something else is complete rubbish. It is highly offensive to Israelis. It's highly offensive to Australian Jews, and frankly, as a white Anglo-Saxon, I find it offensive because I know exactly what they mean, and they need to be called out for it. They need to be called out. And I say to them, take your disgraceful hate and park it.
I doesn't belong in Australia.
I was born and bred here.
Yep.
My family have been here for 180 years. I'm over these people. I really am.
David?
This is probably not going to show well because of the virtual background, but I have actually here one of the scarves that's often used by the Hamas and other terrorist organisations. And on one end of it, and I'll try to get the image up. No, it's not coming up. Oh, there it is a map. And in Arabic above that map is the word Philistina. It's part of the ideology, it's part of the promotion that the entire area, that map, is indeed a map of what exists between the river and the sea.
That's the scarf that the CEO of Get Up wore on Q&A a couple of weeks ago that we were talking about. I think
it's exactly right.
I missed that.
That is right. I was given it by a friend in Israel who happened to obtain a few and told me use it for advocacy in Australia, which is what I do, just simply to expose the embedded ideology. It's the message is clear, as Campbell said. From the river to the sea means the entirety of the land of Israel should be free of Jews and in their hands. I mean, that's what it means, wiping out Israel and maybe wiping out the Jews therein.
Well, I spoke to Dr. Ali Kadri, who's a prominent Islamic community leader and the CEO of the Islamic College of Brisbane, for his thoughts about the protests in an interview that we recorded earlier.
I think it's very important that all people are made aware of their rights, that they have rights to protest and express their opinion. However, also made aware of their responsibility that if that right is going to infringe onto the rights of other people and is going to lead to violence or intimidation or threats or racism of any sort, whether it's anti-Semitism or Islamophobia, then that is collectively not acceptable by anybody in our country on either side of this debate. So I think it's very important that that's unequivocal and clear. Our personal opinions aside, we may have differences of opinion, but I think we as a society, I guess, collectively, and the people who are in the leadership position in our society can agree to one thing, and that is that we cannot allow these kind of divisions, violence, racism, anti-Semitism, and Islamophobia to set into our country.
I then asked Dr. Kadri what he thought about the weekly protest marches and whether they should be kept apart.
I think so too. I think it's best to keep these separate. I can speak for Queensland. I'm involved with the organizers of the pro-Palestine rallies in Queensland. And most certainly their intention and all their efforts is to ensure that there is no violence, no intimidation, no threat from any side, because the idea is to allow everyday Australians, women and children who are upset with what Israel is doing in Palestine, to come out and express themselves in a democratic and a respectful manner. And it will stop or infringe on that right to practice your freedom of speech and assembly if there is violence or any sort of intimidation or threat from either side. So I think they are of a collective opinion, and unequivocally they all agree on the fact that the rallies should be peaceful, and if they are separated, they'll be much better.
That's Dr. Ali Kadri. Campbell, it sounds like he's agreeing with you there in terms of the fact that once it tips over into that point of violence, then, or in terms of, any sort of aggressive incitement to violence.
Well, I think Dr. Kadri's position, as he stated, is quite appropriate for someone of the Muslim faith and a leader of a prominent educational institution, which, by the way, I've been to many times in support of my former political role. So that is, if you like, probably the gold standard from the other side of the debate in terms of the pro-Palestinian side. And I hope that he, as a Queenslander, I hope that through his leadership and the leadership of others in the Islamic community that I know well in this city, that can be maintained, that there can be that democratic protest without the sort of quite nasty and inappropriate things that have happened in Melbourne and Sydney. So, good luck to him.
There's been a bit of concern, and David, I'll come to you on this. There's been a bit of concern about the lack of leadership like that we're seeing from the Islamic side. And then, what has been your take on that? Because you're quite connected with the community there.
Yeah, you're right, Damian. Look, it's good to hear what sounds like a moderate voice in the Islamic community, and I hope that he is a genuine moderate voice. But one of the observations that it hasn't been focused on enough is that none of the Islamic organisations or leaders in Australia have gone the step of condemning Hamas unequivocally, condemning the actual terrorism that occurred on October 7, the slaughter of innocent civilians.
So there hasn't been one official...
Well, it's always been at the very, probably the most, it's sort of like, well, yes, it was bad, but it happened because the Israelis...
That's right. It's always given some sort of pseudo-justification. We have in the Jewish community in Melbourne a couple of left-wing rabbis that were heavily involved in interfaith work. That was their shtick. That's what they did. They have both resigned from their organisations that were involved in the interfaith work because the people they thought they were building bridges with, the people that they've devoted years of their time in developing relationships, could not come to clearly condemning the terrorism which occurred on the 7th of October. So I agree with what Dr. Ali said about freedom of speech and a right of protest, whether you're on this side or that side. I agree with his point that the two sides should be kept apart. We don't want to see violence on the streets. But we do have a problem as to whether people in the Islamic community in Australia are prepared to condemn terrorist organisations, prescribed terrorist organisations and their activities.
Let's talk about the politics.
Can I just throw one thing in?
Yeah.
So I, my political career started about 20 years ago as a candidate for the Lord Mayoralty, and it was in the immediate period post 9/11. The war on terror was just cranking up.
Yes, of course.
And I can tell you now that people like Peter Beattie and a young neophyte politician, Campbell, Newman and others, we worked damn hard to ensure that the Islamic community in this city and in this state weren't vilified, weren't tarred with the brush of being terrorists. And there was a very disturbing incident immediately after, in the days after 9/11, where the Karabi Mosque on the south side of Brisbane was burnt to the ground. So the point I'm making is that politicians from across the political divide worked hard with the police, with community organisations, with the Islamic community to actually say, listen, just because a fringe group has done these things doesn't mean that you then take it out on the Islamic community. So I feel like my appeal to the Palestinian supporters in this, and indeed the left, at the current time in Australia, is don't vilify Australian Jews for what the State of Israel is doing. If you don't agree with the State of Israel, fine, but Australian Jews can't be, in the crosshairs of your campaign.
It's a really good
and I think that's a really important thing.
It is.
And for the Islamic community, I would hope that you would recall that, that people did speak up for Muslims, like myself, like Peter Beattie, Anna Bligh,
Yep.
And it cuts both ways.
So let's have a listen to Penny Wong, because I know you weren't happy.
Yeah.
You tweeted something about Penny Wong's statements this week. Let's just have a look at what Penny Wong said on the ABC TV Insiders show this week.
We all want to take the next steps towards a ceasefire, but it cannot be one-sided. Hamas still holds hostages. How Israel defends itself matters, and we do call on Israel to cease the attacking of hospitals. We cannot allow this conflict to divide us. We have to remember each other's humanity. We have to remember that we are all Australian.
Okay, so she's called for a ceasefire, more or less, or endorsed the idea of a
look, let me deal with it, mate. Look, you don't have to believe me. Believe Amnesty International. In 2014, 2015, Amnesty International published a report, and they are a bunch of left-wingers these days.
Yes, they are, unfortunately.
Which I have no truck with.
No, it's sad.
So there was an outpatient clinic in the Al-Shifa hospital, which they documented was being used for the torture and indeed murder of their political opponents in Gaza.
In 2014, this was published in the Washington Post and the New York Times.
Yeah, exactly. It's published. The report. It's there.
Yep.
So, there is absolutely no dispute that Al-Shifa Hospital has been used for the prosecution of state terrorism by Gaza, and clearly has been the centre of military activity. So we've got
right-wing neo-Nazis online saying, "Oh, this is AI." The Jewish, it's Mossad developing. All this nonsense.
It's complete.
So
David, look, one other thing. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I'll say this. I used to say this.
Don't let. I should know better than to interrupt you.
When I used to have to make tough and unpopular decisions, I'd appeal to the media, David. Sorry, David, I'm going to shut up. I promise you.
He does shut up eventually.
I'll say this. Come on. I'll say
That's why we have you on, mate. I wouldn't have it any other way.
As Premier, I used to say, why do you think I'd be doing this? My government would be doing this. We know it's unpopular. We're not stupid. We know we'll lose votes, but it has to be done. It's the right thing to do. So I say to you, David, I say to our audience, why would the Israelis go after a hospital? They're not winning any friends at all. Their political support around the world erodes day after day. It's because they have to. Because it is a home for terrorism and the prosecution of the war. Sorry, David.
Well, and can I just point out also, and I think to go to David with this, that the extent to which Israel has gone to prevent, harm to people in that hospital is quite extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah.
Look, there's a few things to say. Firstly, it is a well-established, proven modus operandi of Hamas to use human shields. Many examples. And when Israel warns civilians, as they have recently, and they warn them by dropping millions of leaflets, by making millions of calls in Arabic, by sending out messages over the internet and social media, probably more than any other army has ever done to warn civilians to move to certain designated safe zones so that they can go after the Hamas infrastructure. I've seen videos of Hamas blocking the road and on some occasions actually bombing or shooting the civilians that want to follow the instructions to move to the safe zones. And what's more vulnerable than civilians in hospitals? Israel every day in the last couple of weeks has been exposing more and more evidence of the infrastructure embedded, military infrastructure embedded in civilian facilities. Within the last 2 days, there have been videos that are publicly available of what was found at Al-Shifa Hospital, weapons, grenades, military vests, the whole caboodle that's required for a terrorist to go out in action, tunnels, rooms underneath. There have also been historic videos, meaning over the last few years, of rocket fire from immediately adjacent to the hospitals. There was even a famous one of I think it was a CNN journalist reporting from in front of the hospital, and a rocket shot up behind them.
Wow.
So the evidence is irrefutable. It's long-term. More of it is being exposed currently, and it's a really, really hard thing to manage.
All right, well, I want to just talk about the military. So we'll move to the Middle East now and away from the Australian thing for a minute. But the thing that has upset so many people is that we are seeing on television over and over again these highly emotive images. We have the ABC here in Australia reporting 11,000 deaths as if it's a fact, rather than saying 11,000 deaths according to the Hamas Health Authority, which we cannot verify. But let's say it's half 11,000, let's say it's 5,000 deaths, it's still horrible. In terms of that offensive from Israel, that was a severe punishing. Was it from, and I'll come to you on this first, Campbell, from your military background and military expertise, what options were open to Israel? I see people criticising them, a little too quickly, I think, but it's a very difficult time, right? You're in a war. You've got to win the war.
It's not about like David Shoebridge and the Greens and Adam Bant and even members of the Labor Party have been suggesting that you can sort of go in and say, we're surrounding you. Come out with your hands up. We're the police. It's like it's not the Lint Cafe siege in Sydney.
It's not a policing operation.
It's not a policing operation. It's people who are dug in with all sorts of weapons and explosives, who've prepared the battlefield, because that's what it is to Hamas. It's a battlefield. It's an urban battlefield that is designed to then, kill Israeli Defence Force members and to extract the maximum, punishment out of doing that, while politically there's this play which is about, basically dragging the Israeli government's name through mud and having them lose international support. The strategy of the leadership of Hamas is a political one. It's ultimately not a military one. It's a political one to actually, completely shred the credibility of the state of Israel.
Could Israel have fired fewer rockets? I guess is the core of the question.
Well, here's the really easy bit.
You've got to kill that tunnel network.
Here's the really easy bit. The IDF, at the end of the day, of course, will prevail. A far superior military force. Again, it's a sledgehammer.
Against Gaza, but what about everybody else in the Middle East? They're not that.
But here's the
we shouldn't be so confident.
Here's my objection to what Wong said on the weekend. It's very, very easy. Hamas as this military, campaign, this battle with Hamas and the IDF at the moment, it's lost. I mean, Hamas will lose militarily. Okay, so if you're Penny Wong and you want to save lives, it's very easy. Put the white flags up, put down your weapons, come out with your hands up, and release 200 or so hostages. Yes. Release the hostages. It's all over. The killing stops. The innocent civilians, the babies can be given medical care. It all stops when Hamas want it to stop. Yep. But these cynical older blokes who are multi-billionaires living in Qatar, they don't want it to stop. They won't stop, and they will sacrifice their young men, their fighters.
This is the leaders of Hamas who live in Qatar.
They will sacrifice those people, and they'll sacrifice their people, because it's about the politics of this. It's about what their political objectives are.
And there's a lot of funding going in from countries like Australia into Gaza, intended to go to the building of schools, of hospitals, of roads, and that's been used to build this incredible tunnel network. Is the bombing?
Well, it was a really big. It's just we've heard a lot weeks ago about this terrible blockade of the Israelis. Well, it seems like, David, there's an awful lot of concrete and steel and weapons that somehow just they must have the most amazing, industrial
drone network.
Well, no, they must have the amazing weapons and defence force manufacturing. Industry in Gaza. It's just incredible.
Where's all that coming from?
Where's it all come from? How did it get in there? I mean,
David, comments on the...
Well,
Jewish,
I don't
the
know
IDF response rather, sorry.
I don't know exactly how the weapons get in there, but there is some, there is manufacturing there, and there have been smuggling tunnels through Egypt, through the Sinai, a big smuggling industry, and Hamas take their cut. We saw a video of water pipes being dug up by Hamas and converted into rocket cases. So
rocket launching.
Israel, when it withdrew from Gaza, 100% out of Gaza in 2005, dragged the Jewish people who had built homes there forcefully out of Gaza. Not a single Jewish resident in Gaza since 2005. But they left behind an agricultural industry, intense greenhouse farming, and the water pipes were dug up and used for military use. Crazy stuff.
Yeah, okay. So they have to bomb that network of tunnels. You have to get rid of those before you send young Israeli men in to die, right?
Well, you've got to find them first, and in some cases you seal them off. In other cases, you literally have to have people go down those tunnels. So like I used to be in the Corps of Engineers. I was a combat engineer. Yes. Combat engineers in Vietnam against the Viet Cong had to go down tunnels and do what the Israeli combat engineers are doing now. Someone's got to go, and they will be booby trapped, highly hazardous, very dangerous, because the people who built them know where all the traps are, where all the dangerous stuff is. Yep. And it's set up for, and it's their ground. And so the Israelis, are just really trying to very carefully find these tunnels, work out how to deal with the various entrances they find. And of course, the problem they've got is that somewhere down in this network, you've got all these innocent civilians, these hostages who they want to rescue. Otherwise they would be inclined, I'd think, to just, if there weren't the hostages, they would seal the place off.
Yeah. So you're not accepting any of this, moral equivalency from our politicians. Let's look at Albo's performance in Parliament. It is
a war. The people wanting to stop are the people. Would these people have said to the Russians, the Americans, the British in World War II, they've said on the advance on Berlin, stop, there's going to be a humanitarian disaster. We can't go in. We need to have a ceasefire with Hitler. It is very similar. Yeah, Hitler was there in the damn bunker and Berlin was demolished. Very sad. What's happened in the West that people can't even get, that sometimes you've got to do terrible things and innocent people suffer to actually deal with evil, because that's what World War II was about.
It's our humanity, right? It's bloody horrible, and none of us want to see dead babies, right?
Well, so people are just... I'll put it like this.
But we live on planet Earth.
Israel's war in Gaza today is a just war. It's a just war, and they have no choice.
All right,
they have no choice.
Let's have a look
and
at...
it can be any time that community want to have democracy. I'm talking about the Palestinians and the Gaza Strip. Anytime they want to have democracy, they want to renounce their quest to eliminate Israel, and they want to decide they can coexist, then the world can assist them, and they can have a community, and they can have freedom, they can have all those things, they can have democracy, they can be free of Hamas, but they've got to make a call on that. It's their leaders, it's the people they put in ultimately, the despots who are doing this to them. It's like the Nazi Party inflicted what happened in Berlin on Germans.
But it's who's got the organisational power, right? If you're not organised, how could a German stand up against the Nazi Party?
Well, let's talk about the aftermath. The UN, again infected with left-wingers who are anti-Israel, but the UN's legitimate role now is to actually say, how do we put this place back together properly so that Israel is safe, that Palestinians are free and have their own state? That's the legitimate role of the international community, not to lecture Israel on the way they go about defending themselves and rescuing their citizens.
Speaking of which, she appeared on Q&A this week. She appeared at a special National Press Club speech. I'm talking about the United Nations Special Rapporteur, the special talker as I like to call it.
David should talk about this one.
Yeah, the special rapper, whose name happens to be Albanese, by the way. But this Francesca Albanese, she's popped out of nowhere, David. Where has she come from, and where's the United Nations Israeli rapporteur?
Well, if you want fair and balanced diplomacy, don't look towards the United Nations. There is an organisation called StopAntisemitism.org, and each week they run a sort of an anti-Semite of the week that they name. Now, let me tell you, Francesca Albanese is a past winner of Anti-Semite of the Week, according to StopAntisemitism.org.
Do you have any intel on why she's being platformed by the Australian National Press Club?
We have a suspicion, and she is going to Adelaide. And you might ask, why Adelaide? You'll remember that...
Why Adelaide?
Adelaide Writers' Festival.
Yes.
There was a whole series of highly anti-Israel and in some cases anti-Semitic speakers. One who called a Jewish victim of terrorism human garbage, for example. The Australian-Palestinian Advocacy Network, APAN, has its largest donor in Adelaide. If you Google Shahin family, S-H-A-H-I-N, you will find that this is a family with business interests in the billions. They are the largest funder of APAN, and we have reason to suspect that they sponsor anti-Israel advocates, anti-Israel speakers to come to Australia. Can't be certain that it applies in the case of Francesca Albanese. Very likely that, she would have a travel budget of her own and would have been invited. She seems to have developed a close relationship with Nasser Mashni, the spokesman of APAN. So there are enough elements there that cause us to be concerned. I'm not suggesting it's illegal to sponsor someone coming to Australia, but we think that there are some dots which need to be joined.
Okay, let's be absolutely clear on that, though, that it's not illegal for anybody to support any political cause that they want to support in Australia. Correct. So we're not accusing anyone of anything illegal here, but that's the intel that you have on who might be or why this woman has suddenly appeared, apparently, or quite apparently out of nowhere, really, during this interesting time. All right.
There are no accidents in politics, mate.
Let's have a look at, speaking of which, let's have a look at the Prime Minister this week in Parliament. It was quite an extraordinary performance from Anthony Albanese. Let's take the tape.
I make no apologies for being a consistent supporter of a two-state solution. And I make no apologies for trying to bring communities together, not divide them, because that's the role of political leaders. And at a time when there is social division, leaders have a choice. They have a choice to either bring people together or divide them. Try to look for unity or look for opportunism.
Order.
And what we have seen
The member for Fairfax and the member for
with
Groom.
his entire political career has been based upon division between
The member for Groom will cease ejecting.
Now, Jewish Australians are fearful at the moment.
O'Connor.
The sort of activity that is occurring is scaring them, and I stand with them. No one should threaten people because of their religion or their race in this country. But it is also the case that Arab Australians and Islamic Australians and women wearing hijabs in the streets of Sydney and Melbourne are being threatened, and I stand against that as well. The idea of selective human rights is one that I stand against. So I'm opposed to any innocent life being lost, whether it be as a result of the terrorism of Hamas in Israel, those dreadful occasions.
Order.
Dreadful occasions.
Member for Barker will cease interjecting.
Innocent babies, I'm against being killed in Gaza. We have responsibilities as a democratic nation to say that democratic nations must stand up consistent with the international rule of law. And that is something that I have done and will consistently do. That's something that I will have meetings on in APEC at San Francisco. I stand up for Israel's right to defend itself. I've done that consistently. I also say how it does it matters. And I say that we need to care for all civilians.
All right, that's the Prime Minister in federal Parliament this week. The opposition leader, Peter Dutton, had accused the government of failing to stand up for Jewish Australians and for of displaying weakness over the crisis in the Middle East. We haven't seen the Prime Minister get that feisty for quite a while.
Under pressure.
Yeah. Also probably trying to make a very strong statement in order to detract a little from the fact that that is a fairly splinters on the bottom, sitting on the fence sort of response.
Still is, but right? my response, and David's view is probably more important than mine now on this, but it's like this. That's what the Prime Minister said. Well, we've in this program talked about a couple of instances within the Labor Party of anti-Semitism, people being associated with anti-Semitism. In one case, pro-Hamas talk by an elected official. It's been identified, seems to be clear, no one's denying it. What's he going to do about it? The standard you walk past is a standard you accept, Prime Minister. We've heard that bleated out from yourself, but your own lips, and from Labor Party people against the right, from people like Peter Dutton over the years. The former Prime Minister copped from them all the time. Well, what are you going to do about anti-Semitism and pro-Hamas supporters in your own political party?
David?
I'd like to make a couple of observations. Firstly, over a dozen world leaders made solidarity visits to Israel.
Yeah.
And it has been noticed that although Anthony Albanese has made trips to the Northern Hemisphere, he's declined the opportunity to make a solidarity visit, even if it's just 24, 48 hours, highly symbolic. The second observation is that we have seen since the election of the Labor government, half a dozen hostile to Israel policy changes. Everyone knows that the limited recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital was removed by this government. They have increased the funding to Palestinian territories in the budget from 35 to 70 million. And in the last few weeks, Penny Wong has announced a further $20 million. And you're not dealing with normal circumstances. Any aid that goes into Gaza, 100% of the distribution until the last week or two, 100% of the distribution is controlled by Hamas. If they want to grab it, use it for their tunnels, give it to the leaders, the jihadists, it's taken.
Wow.
The terminology has been changed in Australian diplomacy from disputed territories to occupied territories. Our UN voting pattern has been changed, etc.
Shameful.
So all these things are cumulative. And frankly, there was one occasion when Penny Wong was put on a promotional poster by Quds News Network, which is the Hamas propaganda arm. I don't know a previous occasion when an Australian minister has actually been used in Hamas propaganda, but Penny Wong has broken that.
Wow. Okay, there's an honour.
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to get it.
No.
So, all these things have played a part in legitimising the hostility to Israel, and maybe even, emboldening those that support Hamas. I think one of the people whose names haven't been mentioned, but I do want to name it, is Bob Carr is still influential behind the scenes in Labor foreign policy, and he has been very, very active in lobbying Labor at various levels to take a more hostile to Israel, pro-Palestine position, and it looks like he's had some success.
Wow, okay, all right. Gentlemen, I've got to say thank you very much. Any final comments from you, Campbell?
Were you unsure about my position, mate?
No, I think you've made it very clear. It's been thoroughly. David, serious times, but you have got to laugh a little bit at times, otherwise we'd all... how are you going, by the way, and how is the community at the moment? Personally, I mean, you know.
The honest answer is that we're not okay.
Yeah.
We have seen an event which obviously has now been identified as the largest slaughter of Jews in a single day since the Holocaust. We've seen an explosion of anti-Semitism. All of us in Australia have friends and or family in Israel. I personally have lost a cousin, a young woman who was at the Supernova Music Festival, was found amongst the 266 bodies there. And to be honest, I have not inquired about the circumstances of her death. I just hope it was quick, because some of the reports about what Hamas did to young women are just sickening. So it affects the Australian Jewish community very deeply. We're a peace-loving, law-abiding community who make a contribution to Australia. Jews first arrived with the first fleet. And I should hasten to add, not as crew. So unless you're a full-blood Aborigine, the longevity and connection in Australian society is as much as anyone else.
I think this is, I just want to finish on this point, because there's something I think's been lost in all of this discussion, and particularly in the Australian media and the way that things are being reported. The brutality and nature of the October 7 attack. We're looking at this sort of equivalency of proportionality on numbers.
I know you want to wind up. It is proportionally. It was a very significant event in terms of the size of the state of Israel. But I just make the point that, you know, the Nazis with their death squads. A lot of people don't know this. When they went through Eastern Europe, they had massacres. Later, as they were being pushed back, they actually had clean-up squads because they were embarrassed, they were shamed, they knew that they would face condemnation. They tried to eliminate the evidence of their crimes as they pulled back, as they were pushed back by the Soviets.
Right.
Now, Hamas, in contrast, were gleeful. They wanted it. They recorded it. They live streamed it. There's the difference. You know, isn't that incredible? The Nazis were embarrassed by what they did. They didn't want to be caught out, whereas Hamas clearly wanted to do. This was a crime of absolute bestial terrorism.
I think Douglas Murray this week said they had to drink themselves senseless just to cope with it, the horror of it, and yet we see the opposite reaction here.
And some of the forensic pathologists in Israel have reported on what happened prior to death, and have actually said that the barbarity was worse than the Nazis. Well, certainly at least on that level.
Can I just ask you, David, and don't, you don't have to answer this, but I mean, have you been able to watch, or have you seen the footage that was shown to the Western media by the IDF to sort of underscore this? Was it released?
I've seen a lot of video, and frankly, I'll tell people who are responsible. It's not on the general social media, but it is in the public domain. If you go onto Telegram and search either of these terms, Southern First Responders, or alternatively Hamas atrocities, you will see body cam videos, CCTV, a couple of hours of videos collectively on what happened on 7 of October.
Okay, well, warning around that you probably shouldn't do it, but if you do want to and you are,
I have seen a lot of vision myself, And that's why I'm here today, and that's why I am just so unequivocal in my support of the Jewish community in this nation.
As a military man and a leader,
I cannot believe the moral bankruptcy of the left in this country, who just don't get it. And I just don't. I don't get why they've got the stance they have. It's inexplicable to me,
Yeah, it's extraordinary, really. So I think we need to. Well, just one final question to both of you. We tend to sit back and go, oh, Israel should dial it up. Israel should dial it down. Israel should dial it up. Israel should dial it down. As if there's a magic dial when you're running a war, right? It's not possible, is it, for Israel to just turn it up, turn it down?
All this commentary about proportional response. I mean, it's just ridiculous and simplistic. It's like, what? And I get infuriated by the mainstream media, because the moment a Penny Wong says proportionate response, what's the proportionate response? That is the object. That is the obvious next question. Yes. Tell me, is it to go in there and take, 240 hostages or something? Is it to go and rape and murder an equivalent number of people? I mean, of course that's not. But that is proportionate, but it's totally preposterous.
It is preposterous. Look, have an analogy with ISIS, which I guess is a recent extremist terrorist group. And the West made a decision that coexistence with ISIS is not possible. It had to be wiped out, it had to be crushed. Now, there may be a little bit of remnants around, but, there was full unrestrained action against ISIS in order to deal with that level of evil, that level of barbarity. Israel has to take the same approach with Hamas. You cannot coexist with an organisation that is capable of doing what we saw on the 7th of October.
And we didn't scrutinise the United States in Iraq like this. We didn't scrutinise, maybe we should have to a certain, maybe a little bit more, but we didn't scrutinise certainly the assault on ISIS like this. It didn't get the coverage of counting every...
Nor Al-Qaeda after 9/11, when, remember the terminology shock and awe for the magnitude of the military operation that followed 9/11. A decision was made that Al-Qaeda had to be, disabled, if not eliminated.
And the psychological war and impact had to be shock and awe to send that message to save lives in the future. That's something I don't think a lot of people on the left count. They're not counting the future babies, when they think of these things. War is horrible.
If it had been 1,200 Australians massacred by Islamic terrorists, say, on holiday in Bali, and remember the Bali bombing, the Australian community psyche would be somewhat different. I know so many people don't want to bar this. Polling would suggest they don't want to engage, and I can understand that because they're peace-loving people. But if it happened on our doorstep, to our, God forbid, to our kith and kin, there would be a different response in Australia right now. I can tell you that right now.
Do you think that we are a little bit arrogant in the West? You've just come back from the ARC conference in London. Are we a little overconfident, perhaps? Should we be thinking, well, hang on a minute?
Well, that wasn't the view of those who were at the ARC conference or myself. I think these are very, very concerning times. And I didn't say this earlier, but what's going on in Israel is far bigger than Israel. Yes. This is a defining moment, and it is a battle between the left and the right, actually.
And
it really is.
And
it's about civilization, the rule of law, democracy, the truth, good, etc., versus chaos, evil, dysfunction, barbarity. That's why I see it.
My question,
the people who went to ARC went because we're concerned about our civilization.
Yes.
That's why I went.
Yes. And I want to talk to you about that on another show soon.
Yeah.
But just quickly, do you think that we are overconfident? What I'm getting at is, are we a little too comfortable saying,
Complacent.
Israel's going to complacent?
Complacent.
Yes. Israel's going to can wipe out Gaza. We don't have to worry about Israel. Should we be a little bit more worried about Israel and what this could blow
I guess
into,
I am.
and the West in general?
I haven't been so motivated on an issue, both for Israel. I'm only one person, but I haven't been so motivated politically on an issue for some time for Israel and for Australian Jews. That's how important it is to me. That's how I've like.
But what about the security of the West generally? Australia generally.
I think thinking people realise the danger.
Yeah,
that's why
David,
it's so important.
What's your thought on that? This expanding or becoming, getting out of control, and we've got a world conflict, and the West isn't as strong as it thinks it is.
But that's right. I don't see those.
It doesn't go down that track, and I think that's actually the reason why the Biden administration has moved a couple of aircraft carriers into the eastern Mediterranean. They're not going to get involved in what Israel and Hamas are doing in Gaza, but they're there to send a signal to Hezbollah in the north, and the Americans have actually taken out a couple of Iranian military stores in Syria. Their signal is, guys, don't get involved. We don't want the expansion. We're here. That's the only purpose of the American presence, not to intervene in the actual active conflict, which is there. But you guys are absolutely right. This is bigger in terms of society, in terms of civilization. And I'll leave you with this thought. If you want to undermine Western civilization, if you want to undermine because you're into socialism, communism, Islamism, any of the isms, consciously or unconsciously, Judeo-Christian values upon which Western civilization is built, both the Judeo and the Christian side, began in Israel. You're almost reflexly anti-Israel. Now, maybe that's at conscious level, maybe it's a bit too spiritual and subconscious, but attacking Israel is attacking the place where Judeo-Christian values developed, upon which Western civilization stands.
David Adler, President of the Australian Jewish Association, thank you so much for joining us on The Other Side. And Campbell Newman, thank you for joining us, former Premier of Queensland and Lord Mayor of Brisbane and military serviceman, of course. That's all we have time for this week on The Other Side Australia. Please like and share and tell your friends about the show. We do really need your support, and that is the best way that you can support us and help us keep the media landscape in Australia more diverse politically and have more diversity of opinion, the only diversity that should really matter. We'll catch you next Friday for your weekly regular summary catch-up of all the week's news without the woke. I'm Damian. Bye for now.